Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming together to practice together. It's lovely to see all these bright faces and people we haven't seen for a while. So this talk on Sunday, July 16th, 2023, is called Change Your Mind Day. When I was teaching in Anchorage, they had a Buddhist Change Your Mind Day. So they had a park in the center of Anchorage, and there were booths set up, and different Buddhist groups were taking care of each booth, and you could wander around and talk to different Buddhists. And then Portland we used to have a booth in Portland's Change Your Mind Day. And this is from the Oregonian of June 4th, 2005. Portland's Change Your Mind Day draws seekers of all kinds. And then the article goes on to say, Inner Southeast Portland teems with the teachings of the Buddha. From Oregon Buddhist Temple on 34th Avenue to Dharma Rain Zen Center on Madison Street, which is where we used to sit before we bought our temple, the area is packed with places for Buddhists to worship. Yet the gathering spots offer different things. While one Sangha, spelled S-O-N-G-A, which is kind of cute, like we sing songs or chants, yet one Sangha or congregation may emphasize meditation, others prefer chanting. Some temples stress the Heart Sutra, others the Diamond Sutra. The diversity is one of the messages leaders of Buddhist congregations hope to convey during their second annual Change Your Mind Day festival on Saturday at Colonel Summers Park in Southeast Portland. The first Change Your Mind Day happened 12 years before that, 12 years ago, when the Buddhist magazine Tricycle held a free afternoon of meditation instruction to introduce the public to Buddhist thought and teachings. The event was held in New York City's Central Park because organizers thought some might shy away from formal worship spaces. So, for Gen Z people, the first Change Your Mind Day happened not in the 2000s, but in the 1990s. I know that was ages ago. And now, we have people who don't shy away from formal worship spaces. But really each day we have to ask ourselves, is this a Change My Mind Day? Is this a Change My Mind Day? Is this a Change My Mind week? Is this a Change My Mind year? Is this lifetime a Change My Mind, this mind, lifetime? I've heard some people ask, well, why would you want to change your mind? What I think is authentic. It's true. It's really important. And so why would I want to change it? Why would I work many hours to look into it and change it? But if you remember back when you started meditation practice, within a few hours of meditation, you realize that your mind is really crazy. That it's a tangle of thoughts and likes and dislikes, grievances, worries, judgments, criticism of yourself, judgment of others. And people, when they realize that there is no peace of mind in there, they often quit meditation at that stage. We see it happen downtown. People come, they learn to meditate, they're happy to be in the group, they're happy because they can sit and kind of settle, and then when they begin to look a little deeper, they realize, whoa, there's a mess in there. People sometimes will tell me, there's mental illness in my family, my uncle had mental illness, maybe I'm mentally unstable and meditation is making my mind worse. But it's really just a closer examination of what's been going on your whole life since you learned to speak. And then you have a choice to leave it alone or to clean it up. We always have that choice. Every day when we come to sit down, for meditation. We have a choice. Do I look in there, see what's going on, and do I leave it alone, or do I clean it up? This week we had a funny example of that. Last Sunday I found a frozen gluten-free vegan pizza, and dairy-free. It had cheese with a Z on it, in it. And the instructions said, put it directly on the oven rack in your oven when you heat it up. You couldn't microwave it. You just had to put it in the oven on the rack. So I thought, okay, I'll try it. I put it on the rack. And then Hogan was trying to help me take it out. And as he pulled it out, it flipped over. And there was cheese and mushrooms and Beyond Meat all over the rack, all over the bottom of the stove, and then it had dripped down into the broiler pan underneath. Our housekeeping person is groaning. So Hogan and I just looked at it at first. It's like, oh my gosh. But you know, I think partly because my family of origin didn't have real potent inner critics and didn't criticize us a lot. You got advice, you got pointers, but not a lot of criticism. Then my mind doesn't come up with, you know, oh, that was stupid. It just comes up with, oh my gosh, look at this mess. The temptation, you know, for a split second is like, close the door and, and we'll deal with it later. But Zen training doesn't allow you to do that. Once you've seen the mess, you're kind of obligated to clean it up. So Hogan practically took the oven apart. He took the racks out, got the bottom out, the boiler out, and cleaned it up while I hovered and got in the way trying to help, but I was just actually in the way. So this is an aside. This is what happens when two people who were helpers in their first marriage get together, and then in the beginning of our relationship was really funny because there was like this competition to be helpful, right? It's like, would you like some tea? No, I'm fine. I'll make you tea. No, it's fine. You stay there, and I'll make the tea. You know, to go on and like that. Where would you like to go to eat? Oh, I don't know. Wherever you want to go to eat. It's like, just tell me where you want to eat. No, I don't care. It's like that. But this is really important. If we don't turn away from the messy tangle of thoughts in our mind, in our very restless, churning mind, and stick with meditation practice, so we take that first step on deepening, then we can take another step. It just almost happens automatically that we go deeper. And then what happens? We realize that our mind is the source of suffering. It's not just a tangled mess, but it's the origin of our suffering. Do you think you have realized completely that your mind is the origin of your suffering? That's just something to ponder. Not alcohol, not Putin, not Biden, not conservatives, not liberals, not pornography, not crime in Portland, not global warming, or any other person. The source of our suffering is our mind, our own mind. Which means that we're the only one who can clean it up. This week somebody reminded me of some of the 12 steps, and as I've said before, I really like having people who've done the 12 steps come to practice because they know the basics. The problem is not out there, the problem is here. You got to show up over and over again, like every morning and evening in the meditation hall. And it's lifelong work, or lifetimes of work. So the first of the 12 steps, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. You know, you could just change that. We admitted that we're powerless over our minds. And then our minds had made our lives unmanageable. No matter how hard we were working to manage things, things were getting unmanageable, and that's why we came to practice. Second step, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So traditionally in the 12 steps, that's God. But for us, it's Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the three treasures. Can restore us to sanity. And we depend on them all. And of course, ethical living is part of that. The third, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to that power. We made a decision to turn ourselves over to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and to continuous practice. And four, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So we do Fusatsu every month. Last night there was a Fusatsu ceremony here in the Zendo, and part of that is looking at what we have done on purpose or inadvertently to harm ourselves or others. So we take that inventory every month and then do repentance, atonement, and then let it go so we're not dragging this bag of old garbage of what we've done wrong around with us. You know, the inner critic likes to fill that bag, or I call it a filing cabinet, that it maintains of all the things we've done wrong, and it likes to pull open the cabinet and remind us, or dump out the garbage bag and remind us. But once we've, that's a kind of, that's harming ourselves. That's harming our inherent Buddha nature. It's hiding our inherent Buddha nature. It's making us not believe in our inherent goodness when we allow the inner critic to do that. So Fusatsu is kind of a house cleaning, an admission of what we've done wrong, because we all have, even without knowing it. We have to hold it all and then let it go and resolve to do better. This week we had a class on the Four Noble Truths, and one of the questions was about suffering. Suffering seems like a strong word, because most of us are not in chronic pain all the time, mental or physical. So the question was, do you have another word for what you experience? What is called suffering in Buddhism, but do you have another way of thinking of it? And originally it was friction. It was in a wheel that wasn't turning. That was the original definition, not turning smoothly on its axle. So friction, and we all know this with life events. We all know this friction. Like it's subtle though, often. Oh no, I have to do this. I have to clean the stove. Oh, I'm on dishes again. Oh no, that person is coming over to talk to me and I just want some time to myself. Oh no, the thing that I counted on is broken. Oh no, the internet is down. Oh no, I have to work on the weekend. All those little thoughts are just generating suffering. Joman used to have this wonderful practice of, not when her mind complained internally, but when she complained out loud, then she had a band that she had to switch to the other wrist. And she told me, I'm not sure I'm quoting you correctly, but one morning before breakfast she had switched the band many times. So it's that subtle form of suffering, that inner complaining about life, just life as it arrives, as it flows towards us. That is dukkha, that is suffering. Long, long ago in the era of all kinds of events, interesting events, there was one called the EST program. And in EST they called it withholds. How we withhold ourselves, pull ourselves back from full participation in life. That's friction. That's friction with life, with the flow of life. And we have to catch that and learn how to change that. Friction with things as they are. Too hot, too noisy, too cold, not the right kind of weather, not the right kind of food, not the right kind of clothing, not the right kinds of thoughts, not the right kind of company. Other definitions that people came up with were aggravation, unsatisfactoriness, that's a common one, unsatisfactoriness or chronic dissatisfaction. Nothing satisfies completely or permanently, that's actually true. But even though that's true, that nothing can satisfy us completely, there is a truth underneath that we can discover and live. When life becomes inherently satisfying. Or as Guagu said, wonderment. It moves into another stage, which is wonderment, which is like everybody look outside at the trees. Isn't that wondrous? What's going on out there? And then we have a koan about that. How do you know there's wind? We say, oh, it's windy. But how do you really know that there's wind? There's many aspects to knowing that there's wind. And it's not just a knowing out here, oh, the wind, blah, blah, blah. This is how I know there's wind. It's actually experiencing it fully in yourself. How do you experience wind? That's how you know wind. How do you experience it? So another term that people came up with was anxiety, which I call a pernicious form of suffering, pervasive in our society. Underneath it is fear, but it's a more subtle form of fear. This week we came up with the word pernicious in one of our readings. It was about a pernicious weed in our botanical reading for the morning. So we had to talk about what does pernicious mean. I just looked it up today. It has the connotation of wicked, sinister, and evil. Whether you can actually say that about a plant, I don't think so. But maybe hard to get rid of, pernicious weed. And a weed is actually just a plant that's in a place we don't want it, right? Or behaving in a way we don't want it to behave. And I would say pernicious is a wickedly subtle and pervasive cause of suffering. That's anxiety. So we try all kinds of over-the-counter remedies for temporary relief of suffering, like alcohol or food or sex, until those very things become more a source of suffering than a relief from suffering. The problem is not alcohol, but what the mind thinks about alcohol. Oh, this time 5 beers, or eating a whole carton of ice cream, or a one-night stand will relieve my distress and not increase it. The problem is not what's going on in the world, but what we think about what's going on in the world. Because once we have come to equanimity about what's going on in the world, then we have a chance to work effectively and not cause more problems in the world. So in Zen, they talk about a distinction between pain and suffering. That suffering is what we add to what's going on, what's actually happening, like pain. So pain is inevitable. If you have a body, that's inevitable. But then it's what our mind does with it. So the problem is not the pain, it's what the mind does with the pain. So you're sitting. This is my first husband, who was a biologist, used to do this. His legs would fall asleep when he was sitting, and then his mind anxious thoughts would spring up in his mind. Oh, if there's, I'm cutting off the circulation to my legs are going to get gangrene, then I'm going to have double amputations, like that person I saw in the wheelchair with just those bandage stumps, and then I won't be able to dance, or he didn't go to raves, but other people might want to go to a rave or surf anymore. And then pretty soon you get sad and a little tear trickling down your face, because you can imagine yourself unable to do all these things that give you pleasure. Or sickness, old age, and death. The Buddha said these are truths of a human life. So we can have thoughts about them which increase the difficulties of those inevitable happenings. My body is becoming less strong. We can reject that truth of old age, or we can adjust to it and ask for help, or do exercises to gain some strength back. But we're coming from a place of understanding, acceptance, complete acceptance. Acceptance is even a strong word. Just alignment with the truth. And then what do we do from that place? So I'm going to ask for examples. What have you noticed that your mind says to you that causes you suffering? Just some examples. You can just raise your hand and I'll repeat. What does your mind say to you that causes you suffering? Just one simple example.
You shouldn't have said that.
You shouldn't have said that, right? That's the inner censor, right? Yes?
Thinking negative thoughts about other people.
Thinking negative thoughts about other people, that causes us suffering. Yeah, it's not pleasant to experience that, right? Especially people we don't know. Ever notice like somebody new walks in the room and immediately your mind has a judgment of them? It's crazy, but that's what happens. The mind thinks it keeps us safe, like, oh, that's a person who's whatever. But it doesn't make us safe. It makes us ignorant and suffer. Somebody back here?
Yeah, a lot of mine are in the kitchen. This is in the wrong place. Someone didn't wipe this up.
Somebody left this in the wrong place. Somebody didn't wipe this up in the kitchen. Yeah. Anybody else? Any other little suffering thoughts that arise? Driving, and what? Tell me the thought.
That jerk.
That jerk, yeah. That's a mild version of it.
Yes.
That jerk. Yes.
I shouldn't feel this way.
I shouldn't feel this way. Yeah, very interesting. You have a thought like that jerk, and then I shouldn't think that way. So that's called like suffering squared. Yes.
I'm not good enough.
I'm not good enough. Yeah. For what? It's like, what? What are you talking about? I'm not good enough. I'm sitting here. Is that good enough? I'm breathing. Is that what? What's the criteria for good enough? Yes.
I need to try harder.
I need to try harder. Right. I'm not trying hard enough. I mean, that could be true, but it's probably not true, because usually people have that thought. They try very hard. Yeah. And exhaust themselves. But then the inner critic says you're not trying hard enough. Yes?
Worrying what other people think.
Yes, worrying what other people think. That is so amazing to me, because if we actually check, it turns out not to be true. But we're afraid to check in case it's true. It's so amazing. You walk by somebody and they don't acknowledge you're there, and then immediately the mind is like, are they mad at me? Am I in trouble? Did I do something? Did I say something wrong? Just like this whole explosion of thought. But if you actually checked with them, they'd say, "Oh, sorry, I just was preoccupied." But we're we're the center of our world, over and over and over again, and that causes us suffering, to be the center of our world. Yeah, thank you for all those examples. They were good examples. There's a particular notion that our mind holds that is at the heart of our suffering. It's the notion of what? What is the notion that is the heart of cause of our suffering?
So?
Yeah, a separate self. A separate self, a separate and lonely self. A lonely, unsafe, defenseless, defective, unlovable, failing self. Or a particularly outstanding, unusually talented, wonderfully successful self that feeds on adulation and power. We've seen some examples recently in our country. So I've mentioned this before, but I love this example of Thich Nhat Hanh. I was listening to a recording of him doing a retreat for therapists. This is decades ago. He was doing a retreat for therapists, and one person said, So does meditation practice and mindfulness, does that work for people with low self-esteem? And Thich Nhat Hanh quietly said yes, and for people with high self-esteem. I just thought that was such a great, because low self-esteem in a way is high self-esteem. They're exactly the same, they just have different valences. So when I began practice and been practicing for a few years, I started pondering all the problems in the world. And do they come from a defective sense of self? So, name some world problems that are right now. Hunger. Homelessness. So, hunger in the world, is that related to a defective sense of self? That we're holding a defective sense of self. How could it be related to that? Yeah.
I mean, do you want the relative or the absolute that some conditions are pretty ill-suited to realize such a thing, but perhaps if one is sufficiently secure in a unbundling from the sense that they're this entity being attacked by potentially extremely challenging circumstances, they're free in sensation, non-sensation that's afflicting them.
Yeah, so that's what happens when we have a defective sense of self, a sense of an isolated self. Then things become dangerous, even within our own body, like it's attacking us. In terms of hunger, we have enough food to feed the whole world. There was a S developed into the Hunger Project, and they established there's plenty of food. It's just that we don't have the will to distribute it. So it's a defective sense of self in terms of the whole self is not being fed. Right? So think about the war in Ukraine. Was that caused by a defective sense of self? What do you think? On Putin's part? Putin wants to go back to the old Russian Empire, right? And then he'd be a hero and so on. And that's how this whole thing started. Or war, like my country isn't big enough, and so I want your country. I want the resources in your country, which Ukraine has a lot of resources. So the earth doesn't have lines that say, this is France and that's Germany. We made those lines and then we fight with each other over, I want more territory. To make myself feel what? Better. So, really when you try it for yourself, I tried it for, hours looking at different world problems, and it all came down to a defective sense of self. But maybe you'll find an exception. Like racism, white privilege. The thought that myself is inherently better than you. Displacement theory. I want to keep what I have. I don't want to lose anything. I want to gain rather than lose. I'm not happy with what I have. And I don't want it taken away. Or immigration, same. Or the huge prison population. Myself needs to be prevented from contact with people who are dangerous, so let's lock them up. Or addiction. This lonely self that's suffering. Oh, I'll relieve suffering by doing this thing. So our practice is about examining and changing our mind so as to reduce our own suffering and simultaneously the suffering of others. Last week, for those who were here for the talk last week or heard it online, Shonin talked about her practice of examining thoughts to see, is there dukkha in that thought? Is there suffering in that thought? I thought that was really a brilliant practice. So it's related to the Byron Katie work, right? Which has the 4 steps of examining and turning turning around. But this is a quick way to look. Is there suffering overt or hidden in this thought? So the Buddha spoke very clearly about changing our mind, and that's the sutra that I've passed out. So let's chant that sutra together. This is a direct quote from the Buddha himself. So I'm going to just give you an example. I'll chant the first few lines. So the dot above means go up one note, and below means go down. And then there's a line, it means prolong those syllables. So, before I was enlightened, it occurred to me, suppose I divide my thoughts into two classes. I will set on one side thoughts of sensual desire, thoughts of ill will, thoughts of cruelty, and thoughts of envy. Got the idea? Let's try it. Sutra on the cultivation of thought. Before I was enlightened, it occurred to me, suppose I divide my thoughts into two classes. I will set on one side thoughts of sensual desire, thoughts of ill will, thoughts of cruelty, and thoughts of envy. I will set on the other side thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of loving kindness, thoughts of compassion, and thoughts of sympathetic joy. What thoughts lead to my affliction, my obstruction, obstruction of others, obstruction of wisdom, cause difficulties, and lead away from nirvana. Bhikkhus, whatever a bhikkhu frequently thinks and ponders on, that will become the inclination of their mind. If they frequently think and ponder on thoughts of sensual desire, thoughts of ill will, thoughts of cruelty, and thoughts of envy, then they have abandoned the thought of renunciation. To cultivate a heart of sensual desire, a heart of ill will, a heart of cruelty, and a heart of envy, if they frequently think and ponder on thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of loving kindness, thoughts of compassion, and thoughts of sympathetic joy, then they have embraced the thought of renunciation. To cultivate a heart of loving kindness, a heart of compassion, a heart of sympathetic joy, then they dwell serene in equanimity, at home in the divine abidings. So when we work with children and a child attempts to plug something metal into an electric outlet, we practice substitution because we know they're in danger, and so we pick them up and take them over here and say, let's read a book, or let's color with crayons, or let's go outside into the sandbox. So we have to treat our mind like a child who's headed for danger, and pick it up and put it in a healthy path, on a healthy path. That's exactly what the Buddha said to do. And this is not trivial, because now neuroscience is showing that whatever we keep doing in our mind wears, we could call them ruts, where it keeps reinforcing neural pathways. And if we don't keep doing that, then those neural pathways start weakening and disconnecting. And if we practice something wholesome, then those neural pathways are strengthened until that's the way our mind naturally goes. But it takes time. Changing ingrained habits of mind takes time. So the first aspect of changing our minds, for Change Your Mind Day or year or lifetime, is to practice changing them daily, maybe hourly, changing your mind. Then the second aspect of changing our mind, to become liberated from mind-generating suffering, is to access original mind. So we have this koan. What was your mind before you were born? The other day when Dojin was doing a class, he talked about the infant mind. So we can all, often during sesshin, I say, imagine yourself as an infant. So you have no thoughts in your mind. It's all just pure experience. And I was laughing about, babies, they're lying there and this thing comes in front of them and they're like, ow. Because they don't know that's their hand. It's just some colored thing that appears. And in meditation, gradually we can go back to that state of wonderment that infants have, like, whoa, a sound, a sound, a color, a touch. Before we had words, and before the mind decided we were unsafe because we were separate, and it had to protect us by thinking all the time. And by being preoccupied with things that might harm us, negative things. So to become entranced through our practice in what's new. Because everything is new when you're practicing. Because the mind just lets go and moves on, lets go and moves on. In order to access our original mind, our natural mind, our essential mind, we need to be willing to set aside what blocks our experience of it, which is our thinking mind. We have to learn to access silence. Dogen Zenji's instructions, which we've been reading every day, after you settle yourself for Zazen, think of not thinking. Then he asks the legitimate question, how to think of not thinking? Non-thinking. Non-thinking is a process. It's an undertaking, it's a practice. There are many other instructions hidden in all of our chants about stop thinking. Just let it go, like clouds drifting through a beautiful blue sky. Once I was talking to a Catholic nun, and she said that her practice was 2 hours of prayer in the morning. Her first hour of prayer was like sorting through the problems, and there are the classic prayers asking for help. But then her second hour of prayer was to just keep her mind completely quiet and listen to see if there was a response from God. And from that, I developed my motto of, God can't talk to you if the line is busy. Or original nature or Buddha nature or enlightenment or original mind can't get through if the line is busy. So right now, just try to make your mind silent. So not forcefully, just gently hold it down like a restless puppy. Just like put your hand on your mind and gentle it down. And have a few moments of silence. Awareness without thinking. So be aware of the spaciousness that creates, the absence of thoughts. And just let your senses open. So that's the basis of our practice. And it happens, of course, during retreat. More easily, we can touch it, access it more and more as the days of a retreat go by. And we're starting a retreat on Monday. We have to keep going back to it. We have to renounce, as the Buddha said, the thoughts that cause us difficulty and hide our experience of our true nature. So in summary, there are two aspects of changing our mind. The first aspect is active practice to see how our mind is generating suffering and to change that habit pattern. And letting go of thought. So we can change our thoughts, but then ultimately we have to let go of our thoughts. Sometimes I call it, this is how Stone called it, turning off radio station KRAZY. Just like, sometimes I just like reach out in my mind, like I'm turning the knob, I'm turning it off. And then of course it turns itself back on, so you have to keep doing that, right? Holding the mind gently down until it relaxes. And eventually the mind realizes, wow, I've entered a space where I feel actually safe. And I've been working so hard, I need the rest. And the mind will finally release into that spacious place, happily. And then comes wonderment. So that opens the second aspect of changing our mind, learning to switch at will from thinking mind to awareness mind. This gives us access to original mind and the ability to make it our preferred operating mode. And when it does become our preferred operating mode, then something interesting happens. We align with the flow of life. Friction lessens, and at times it disappears. And out of quiet, spacious mind emerges a different kind of thought. Creativity. Creativity just flows up. We know that from science, the example I give many times of Einstein, when he stopped thinking about the puzzle of relativity and looked out the window idly at the train flowing by, then there it was. So out of quiet, spacious mind, there's a different kind of, we could call it thought, but it's actually creativity. Original mind is a humming factory of endless creativity, producing things all the time, everything, billions and billions of things, continually generating everything that is. A different kind of thought, wisdom, prajna paramita, wisdom beyond wisdom, insights, solutions that were blocked by our anxious thoughts. And compassion emerges spontaneously, compassion that was blocked by our obsession with I, me, and mine. So we have to be patient when we do this work. It's not something you accomplish in one weekend retreat. You can get a taste of it, or one long retreat, or a year of long retreats. When I was on fire doing koan work, Maizumi Roshi would say, Chozen, be patient. Patient because this is not just our lifetime of thinking habit to clear away, but many, many lifetimes. So please, be patient and do this most precious work together.